In 2006, you were awarded the Beth Medal for lifelong achievement by the Royal Society of Literature, and I'm glad you've chosen as your next poem one of your own.
In the Beginning by Ronald Blythe. Before our boldness crept upon us with desolate bells, and captions of our fear appeared in flag-rimmed ponds where once the early image glowed, we were the newcomers. Our hills were wonders, our tall trees amazed us. Tall, trembling trees sang with birds and new leaves above the white journeying swans. And everything began. The empire of the wheat drew us on, whispering, everything is to come. Our minds eddied like a river. Larks promised illimitable heights. Nothing was too far. Flowers blazed a path for us. Grasses ruled the hill. There was no retraction, only a going on. Of course, there were bad rulers and irritable men at the helm, insisting on this and that. But we were too young to hear them. Even the clocks could not tell us the time.
Lovely.
Okay, now we're now going to hear from Boileau, who is going to present something in her own way.
A publisher wrote to Ronnie and said, "You can go anywhere in the world, all expenses paid, if you will then write about your trip." He chose to go up to Orkney to visit George Mackay Brown. The book that resulted from that trip was Going to Meet George. And George said on that occasion, "What a mercy God taught us how to write. What else would we have been fit for?" I'm going to read the poem Ronnie wrote about Orkney. The Ministry of Works, Orkney. I think I'm better without my glasses. Now that the years slip away like paper things, let me take stock of everlasting ruins. There they stand above and below, the everlasting rooms and temples. The "I was here" graffiti, the razor-sharp ring, the million flowers, life after life. Sweetheart scratchings, century after century, boys' hearts ruining the ruins. And the date. Later, with a borrowed trowel, they let me trouble the bones of a curled-up man. Might he have raised this stone? No, they said, he was too young to do more than scratch its surface. Mark well a country whose monuments endure beyond comprehension. See it today, wounded by inquiring trenches. Someone in future history will scrape away at our dig and not find us. Miles of wild iris fill the loch. How these stone circles must miss the singing. I have 12 Collins given me 12 minutes to talk to you about Ronnie. And I wondered how on earth I could constrain myself within that time, because my heart is so full of him, and decided to keep what I say within a framework, and that constraint is the letter C. Courtesy. The warm welcome. Come in, dear Polly. How nice to see you. Ancient Nash teacups. His full attention. How he listens and hears and responds. Cats. The white cat who became so famous through word from Wormingford. When he died, Ronnie kept quiet about his bereavement so as not to be inundated with letters of condolence. He replaced him rather quickly with 2 lively kittens. One of them is up there above. He said, "That's my photograph." And he wrote a funny story about John and Christine Nash's 3 cats, Queenie, Mad Doll and Wee Wack. followed by a recipe for cooking lights for them. Set to boil in the light saucepan. Leave the kitchen, or even, if necessary, the house. And when cold, cut up with scissors and serve with the grey gravy on tin plates. Calmness. The minute you walk into Bottingham's, you're enveloped in a sense of calm which emanates from him and from the old house itself. His deep spiritual strength, his groundedness, and his joy in the simple fact of being alive. You sense the love he has for the house, its contents, its former owners. I called on him once shortly after he had had his brick floor relaid. He was delighted with it and described how a stream used to run over it, right through the house. John Nash had it channelled to run round the house. Most floors round here, he said, used to be made of sand and brick, but after the war they were taken up, concreted over and carpeted. Containment. Ronnie doesn't feel the need to be somewhere else or to do something else. Fortunate the writer or artist whose parish is his universe, he says. I don't actually agree with Richard Holloway, who says in one of the prefaces of the latest book, describes him as a melancholic. I see him as content in his own skin and contained in his own parish. Consolation, compassion. He's been the go-to destination for many of us at times of loss and confusion. I called on him when my mother died. I called on him when my husband Charles died. I called on him when my marriage with David foundered. He listened and allowed the conversation to flow like the stream that still flows past Bottingham's. Commitment, such discipline. First thing, he sings his silent window song. After breakfast, he works with his back to the window in his upstairs study. In the afternoon, he will garden or walk or receive visitors. Commitment to church times, for which he wrote his weekly word from Wormingford. For 25 years, he typed it up, sealed it in an envelope, and walked up the track every Tuesday to post it in time for the Friday edition. One day in 2017, I was with him when the phone rang. Would you answer that, dear? It was church times asking for Ronnie's word. Yes, that's right, I have it ready. I'll just go upstairs. And he dictated what he had written over the telephone. Not long after this, he relinquished the column, and it was given to the wonderfully eccentric poet-priest Malcolm White. It's on the back page still, and it's called Poet's Corner. Church and Christ. A lay reader, he regularly took services at his 3 local churches, Wormingford, Mount Bures and Little Hawksley. Essex churches, by the way. Ronnie lives in Essex, not Suffolk. People flocked to those matins or evensong services, lifted from the Book of Common Prayer with readings from the King James Bible, the liturgy we grew up with, the liturgy our forefathers said and sang, and now a rare treat for older churchgoers. His sermons were a treat too. Crocodiles. The dragon on the wall in Weston Church. The dragon in a window at Wormingford Church. The speculation as to the origin of the name Wormingford. Was it St. George's worm dragon or Videmund's Ford? Ronnie's theory was that crusaders brought back baby crocs from the Nile in their saddlebags as pets for their children. and when they got too big for the bath, released them into the store. Was this a sort of early rewilding exercise? Connections. Ronnie connects people to people, places to places, people to places. These threads reach out in all directions, both geographically and in time, past and future. I could bring in another C word here, that is conjuring up. To have a conversation with Ronnie is to be taken to places, for instance, Blythe Church or Staverton Fix. And he only needs to speak of his old friends, and there they are, Imogen Host driving down the high street in Aldborough, Cedric Morris tending to his irises at Benton End, George Crabbe planting snowdrops at Glenham Hall, William Cowper talking to his pet hare called Puss, and of course Cowper's close friend George Herbert, poet, priest, who lived at Beamerton Rectory, where Vikram Seth now lives and who has been to Bottencombs. As Ronnie says, and this is a saying he inherited from John and Christine, where would we be without our dear ones? So in conclusion, I'm going to read Ronnie's poem to George Herbert, poet, priest, singer of window songs. And it's from this book, the slimmest of all the Ronnie books I have, and probably the most expensive, decadal. Holy Mr. Herbert. Holy Mr. Herbert, breathing his native air, sang a song to Jesus on the borderline. A boy's song, an early song, which went unheard. Only the linnets listened as it rose and fell. We will hear you later, George, his grown-up brothers said. Holy Mr. Herbert, breathing bad Cambridge air, was seized by the fenny ague which lived in that town. But still he sang a song to Jesus in his clear voice. For young singers know that they have donkey's ears ahead and no time to keep. Holy Mr. Herbert, tall and straight and grand, sang his matins in a fallen aisle, showed ploughmen and gypsy boys into the best pews, wore the cleanest robes, wed his cousin Jane, and galloped into Salisbury every Thursday to sing with the singing men. Holy Mr. Herbert dined on nuts and skim, laid a place for Jesus where they could hear each other talk, passed him the bread and wine, got thinner and thinner from the fenny ague, wrote a lot of words, then left his living so that he could be everywhere. For this is what happens to singers, birds or men. They turn into a tune which hangs around till kingdom come. Holy Mr. Herbert had a lute, the best words, a short life, rang his own bell, was properly liturgical, and quite brilliant, they say.
That's lovely, thank you, Anne. The Penguin, of course, as we said before, called him to write about the interwar years. Okay. So now I'm going to call on Beth Soule to read from The Age of Illusion. And this is actually about founding of the BBC, which was 100 years ago.
The Age of Illusion, Chapter 3. Prospero. Be not afeard, the isle is full of noises, sounds, and sweet airs that give delight and hurt not. The Tempest. A young Scotsman of your ability let loose from the world with £300, what could he not do? It's most appalling to think of, especially if he went among the English. J.M. Barrie, what every woman knows. On St. Valentine's Day, 1922, the Postmaster General gave permission for vocal and gramophone selections and calibration signals for amateurs to be transmitted from broadcasting station at Brittle, Essex. There had been a good deal of intermittent broadcasting before this, but Brittle was the first step towards a regular service. From as early as 1919, the Marconi Company at Chelmsford, under the direction of Captain Round and W.D. Ditcham, had been building up a little nucleus of listeners in, whose ears had occasionally thrilled to the imperial voice of Melba. Chelmsford had been Chelmsford had been between 5 and 10,000 listeners, and Brittle only very few more. What Brittle did have was Captain P.P. Eckersley, the proto-radio personality. It was he who presented to the British Broadcasting Company at Savoy Hill a quorum of wireless enthusiasts with some experience of reception, even if what they received, aesthetically speaking, was hazy in the extreme. The exciting new invention was at first accepted by many people as an extraordinarily novel toy. Licences to listen in rocketed from 10,000 to 500,000 in a year. In 1924, they soared to 129,000, and by 1927, when the British Broadcasting Company became the British Broadcasting Corporation and a moral force in the land, it was estimated that 2.5 million homes had a wireless set. Wireless was perhaps something of a misnomer, for the houses of those who possessed receivers became festooned with aerials, and local authorities came out heavily again against what the blasés were beginning to call the Babel machine, and forbade practices such as running aerials across streets and erecting masts in residential areas. In the United States, things were different. Each nation had begun as it meant to go on. When Melba was directing her mellifluous patriotism into a funnel-like contrivance at Chelmsford in 1921 to a few thousand people, there were more than 1 million receiving sets in America, and licences to broadcast were granted by the various state legislatures without a glimmer of restriction to challenge the gloating eyes of commerce as it surveyed the profits of the new medium. Travellers returned to Britain with tales which made the press barons and Oxford Street shopkeepers blink. And while British broadcasting was still at the Writtle stage, more than 30 applications from businessmen had been received by the government for permission to open their own broadcasting stations. The very impetus of the wireless boom and the passionate quality of the public's interest in it made the government cautious, and with typical Anglican piety, they steered the dangerous marvel into a via media, where its delights may be balanced Diabolo-like on a tightrope, controlled at one end by the post office and at the other by the wireless manufacturers themselves. This is how the British Broadcasting Company was invented, though even then the government put the whole affair on a trial and error basis, granting the company 2 years' practice only, and a further 2 years' extension if it happened to like the practices. Broadcasting, like the church, was thus subtly attached to the establishment. The immediate problem which faced the broadcasters was coverage. An institution which called itself the British Broadcasting Company had its obligations, and plans were at once made to construct 8 main stations, and to face the formidable and unprecedented tasks of filling these stations with sounds which wireless holders would like to hear. There was little anxiety about cultural standards at first. Wireless was such a miracle that almost any tinkle or talk which came over was welcome. But its potential uses were so great as to be unnerving, and it was with these scrupulously in mind that the newly formed company put the following advertisement in the press. The British Broadcasting Company, in formation, applications are invited for the following officers: General Manager, Director of Programmes, Chief Engineer, Secretary. Only applicants having first-class qualifications need apply. Applications to be addressed to Sir William Noble, Chairman of the Broadcasting Committee, Magnet House, Kingsway, WC2. A few days before this, a tall, bitter-faced young Scot had sat in the congregation of Regent Square Church and heard a sermon preached from a text in Ezekiel. Thus saith the Lord, I sought for a man among them that should make up the hedge and stand in the gap before me for the land, that I should not destroy it. But I found none. The minister, Dr. Ida Robertson, looking about him, thought that perhaps there was someone in the church that very night who might do great things for the country. On October 13th, 1922, the young Scot equated Dr. Robertson's sermon with Sir William Noble's letter by writing an application for the post of General Manager to the new company. He posted the application in the letterbox of the Cavendish Club, discovered that Sir William's family came from Aberdeen, retrieved the letter, and wrote another one to include the information that his family also came from Aberdeen. Posted this letter and waited. Exactly 2 months later, on December the 14th, John Reith was appointed General Manager of the BBC at the salary of £1,750. The hedge had been made up with a vengeance, with an autocratic 6'6" Presbyterian stick. The story of the Mansborn Glasgow engineer's arrival at the cot of the BBC is a very celebrated one and belongs to the breathless sphere of those happy accidents which tend to make the wheel of history look uncommonly like the machinery of a roulette table. Some might call it luck, some call it providence. The microphone was worn, and John Reith was there to suckle it, to guide its infant lispings, to wean it from the pap of the first years, to train it, lecture it, cherish it, and protect it from the tycoons. Sometimes to spank it, but finally to see it take its place authoritatively amongst the most ancient institutions in the country, and all in less than a decade.
Of course, many people who belong to the Church of England and who buy the Church Times turn at once, as I do, to the back page, Ronnie, for that blog. I guess it's a blog, such an ugly word, isn't it, blog?
Yes.
Oh, what an awful word. But anyway, I think that's what you do every week. You write a column, and it's wonderful, because you capture the imagination.
It began 20 years ago when I was the chairman of a little committee, Church House, which had to choose the best religious broadcasting and television. And there's a woman on the committee, and she said the editor of the Church Times, on John Ware, sorry to say his diary, that I should write for it. And he said, well, I do what they call the diary. Well, I actually don't know what goes on in the Church of England on the whole, so I couldn't fill up the page. Then he said, do a little column there, and he wrote a word for Wormingford, actually. And then some people don't think Wormingford's a real place, and they think it's such an invention. But anyway, ever since.
It's wonderful. It's a lovely, it's such a gift every week. It raises the spirits.
Richard is going to read us an extract from A Year at Pottingham. Have no fear, not a whole year, just a couple of weeks. August the 6th, the Transfiguration and Mr. Rix's onions. The August butterflies are at their nectar feastings all over the garden, but I dare not name them. For when I have done so in the past, lepidopterists have pounced on me without mercy. Birdsong, butterflies, moths, one can go so wrong. However, white and brown and tortoiseshell butterflies are at this moment all over the place, and a green woodpecker screams ahead of me wherever I go out. And I have preached on the transfiguration of Jesus nearly a week before the 6th, so what will become of me, heaven only knows.
The feast entered the calendar in 1457 to celebrate the victory of the Christians over the Muslims at Belgrade. History makes one despair. Brush it aside, return to the mountain and that dazzling sight, that eternal and that homely vision, that little praying circle. A brownish-red butterfly beats its wings inside the pane. It beats inside my hollowed hands and soars into the sky. Boyhood friends complain that I never mention our Suffolk hometown, Sudbury, so I will. I visit a shrine there at least once a month. It's called Waitrose. And I cannot fail to see the 3 huge wall churches and the statue to Thomas Gainsborough on the Market Hill, and the croft with its 100 swans, and the Stour with its near fatal memories, getting half drowned when I was 8, and the farmers' pubs, and the not now quite recognisable faces, for time insists on reintroductions. As for ghosts, they are now the main population. Canon Hughes on his big black bike, girls who are now old ladies, boys who are old chaps under the grass, music from long-locked organs. Plenty of butterflies in Sudbury, fluttering about the stalls without saying who they are. Ovid would have recognised them as classmates. The country buses come and go, shuddering through the ancient streets, a procession of all its own. I imagine Tom Gainsborough, aged 18, easel on back, striding to Cornard Wood. I have lunch in the White Horse, where his uncle was landlord, and watch, which is what writers chiefly do. Watch out, they used to say, as the harvest vehicles creak through the town about this time of the year, squeezing the tarry roads. I cool off in St Gregory's, where I worshipped as a young man, and heard Canon Hughes thundering the litany in his Welsh accent, his bald head sparkling with the effort of it. I hear the choir rendering Marbeck, and the congregation rising to the occasion. Services, services. Shall we see you on Sunday? What a question. I'm told that people are surprised, or intrigued, to hear that John Updike goes to church every Sunday. He used to write about me in the New Yorker, a me I have never quite known, but I never wrote back, of course. Wormingford is being cut. Just fragments of it, not the full harvest. There is a rumbling introit, which could only be the trailers of Mr. Rix's onions. They're like long boxes, not quite wide enough sides, so the onions leave a nice trail, which we are allowed to gather up. It's a kind of onion gleaning. The church school is broken up, and some torpor can be expected. Holidays have scattered the congregation to the uttermost parts of the earth, including Newmarket. There is a lull and absence. There is deadheading and ringing. There is nobody about. But then there really is in these curious country days, and the land is tidy to a T without a worker in sight. Yet, to transpose a glorious acknowledgement, it is good, Lord, to be here. November the 26th, Christ the King. The white cat and I have one thing in common. We are immediate wakers. None of that dozy in-between business for us. We are either dead to the world or suddenly alive in it. Who are we when we sleep? I watched David Beckham sleeping in the National Portrait Gallery and the commuting girl asleep on the train. How vulnerable they are. I imagine Himmler asleep, his rimless glasses on the bedside table, tomorrow's orders by their side. I creep in to kiss the sleeping child good night, but now it is dark morning and black trees, and the cat ordering breakfast pronto, and a page on my desk saying, "To be continued." I tell the cat, "It is vain for you to rise up early, to sit up late, to eat the bread of sorrows, for so he giveth his beloved sheep. And what a gift!" But all she hears is the word "eat." A nice slow light heralds Christ the King. Pius XI inaugurated this now popular observance for the last Sunday in November in 1925, perhaps after reading in Revelation, "The kingdoms of this world are become the kingdoms of our Lord and of his Christ." An old Cowley father once told me, when I was young, it was all Christ the King, but now it's all Christ the servant, and I have to get used to it. This was before the hymn obligingly healed the rift. The new morning is not much unlike my and the cat's awakenings. Inky one minute, clear as daylight the next. Having gobbled up the bread of sorrows, aka whiskers, she returns to oblivion, and I tap out a sentence or two, just to show willing. Radio 3 is playing something by Beethoven's father, Johann. I think of the little Elector listening to it as he plays trick-track with his ladies. Johann, they said, taught his son nothing but music, and that quieted savagery in order to make him a wage earner at 6. The burgomaster, passing the house, glimpsed the tiny Ludwig, or Louis as he was called then, standing in front of the clavier and weeping. Having just come to the last page of Vikram Seth's marvellous novel, Unequal Music, I too could weep. No more chapters, no more words, just the back cover, just the now redundant bookmark. All done. My sister said that she read it through a second time, not able to leave these lovers and their quartet, their London and Rochdale and Venice. But I must have a space in my head for them to play Bach in for a long time to come. I haven't been so overwhelmed by a novel about musicians since in my teens I read Henry Handel's Richardson's Morris Guest. Vikram Seth took his title from John Donne's prayer, the one I always say at village funerals. And into that gate they shall enter, and in that house they shall dwell, where there shall be no cloud nor sun, nor darkness nor dazzling, but one equal light. No noise nor silence, but an equal music. No fears nor hopes, but one equal possession. No foes nor friends, but one equal communion and identity. No ends nor beginnings, but one equal eternity. I clear the breakfast things and shake the cloth over the sodden grass. After a cautious 5 minutes, 2 wrens appear, small and trembling, perfect creatures. They eat in a kind of terror. A speck of apple, a toast crumb, then a wary flight to a furry leaf, and this over and over again. The weather contradicts the forecast and is damp and moody. Radio 3 plays on, but like the Elector, I am often not hearing it, this equal music, and I am ashamed. I'm thinking what to say about King Jesus. And shall I plant more bulbs?
Okay, Peter. Peter Sandberg can read a section from At the Yeoman's House.
This extract is called Survival. Old farms sank or swam in the 20th century, tottered, fell into ruin, were no more. Farmers fled from them. Owls and tramps took them over. Suicides drowned in their water butts. Ploughs rusted in the barns. But their orchards fruited, and their wells continued to be fed with springs. What pulled them down was the penury of their fields, the unmanageable acres, the mad hedges, the accusation of good soil left unattended. An abandoned ship or factory or mine is bad enough, but a given-up farm contains an element of sacrilege which makes it doubly unwanted, both economically and spiritually. Those who did not farm before the Great War, and who could not understand this, wrote to the newspapers and spoke from the pulpit about the flight from the land. Bottomgol's farm did not so much fall in as fall into abeyance, took a deep breath and began the waiting game. Its ruin was small enough not to threaten the scenery. It could sink back into the soil without leaving a tragic mark, or artists and such rural oddities, or gypsies even, people without land values, might perch in it without danger of depression. There were little wildernesses like it all over East Anglia, where bikes were propped in the sheds, the washing hung out, and the fire blazed for a few bob a week. And those tenants' hearts did not break when wildflowers conquered the corn. In the 1880s, when 7 years' rain and the North American grain ships between them destroyed British agriculture, and the squire's daughter received the yeoman's farm as part of her dowry, it was hardly worth the cultivating. 40 years later, her executors conveyed it to Harry Munson, a farmer in the next village, for the sum of £1,820. And he, after the harvest of 1936, to Herbert Lewis of the neighbouring Maltese farm for £1,200. And he to Captain John Nash, official war artist, in 1944 for £700. That is the buildings only, the 50 or so acres which remained of the original farm being absorbed in the surrounding cultivation. Thus ended the yeoman's lot. John Nash was not less than exultant. 2 horse ponds, never pass up a good pond, 2 acres or so of every kind of soil a gardener could lust after, and buildings galore. As for the trees, the elms and ashes, the tremendous oaks and the banks begging a nut walk, and the paddock asking for an orchard, They took his breath away. Only when a farm becomes calamitous can it become something other. So never again would it be all that freehold farm with the messuage or farmhouse, outbuildings, closes, pieces or parcels of land belonging thereto, called bottingons, otherwise bottenens, and now bottingons, a name out of Mervyn Peak and doomed to be everlastingly spelt out on the telephone. Never more would its arable, pasture, lards, etc. be coloured yellow for buyer after short-term buyer. It would be a dwelling house. And next we have a poem called Down to the Dwelling House. Steps from the bee road to the unlettered track return me daily to my dwelling house, as the deeds proclaim it. Carts, herbs and farming feet have impacted this flint mile. Grass the height of axle trees has spared its crown. I tread the grass to subdue this crown, to stay it from doing more than it does, which is to stroke the bellies of calves. My slight levelling might just save a slicing of their exhaustive parts. Intending guests telephone to ask not, how are you, but how is the track? All over England comes the question, how is your track? It is most inquired of. I consider then its metal, its middle rising proud, and answer, fine. And indeed it is most fine, most serviceable for its early intention, which was to carry farming feet, carts and herbs down to the dwelling house. But how is the track for Saabs and Minis, Fiats even? This is what my guests are asking, though too polite to be that explicit. I hear them rumbling away with low clearance and self-concern. Is it possible they might walk an uninitialed mile from a bee road to a dwelling house? Take today the Annunciation. I tread the crown whilst fetching milk, ever thoughtful of these riders. I see the cold stream pastures shining, the cornhill pressing against the sky, the March plants making cushions, black medic, agrimony, chilver, nettle. Of course, all the new unravelling leaf, flowered wheat on the move. I hear the wind answering the wires, feel the track thinking back to what farming feet asked of it. Rough walkers on rough ground who trod it without assurances. And finally, another poem, June, 9 p.m. The social bees work late, barren girls with honeyed thighs labouring among Aquilegia, the eagle flower, purple spurred, multitudinous, nearly a weed. I sit in the mid-year garden to hear the poplars clatter and to admire what I have done. The day is advanced, the bees drone vespers, the sun hits the wheat. Farmers sat on the doorstep at this hour, aching and comfortable, their eyes registering a patch of pinks and mignonette as their gaze settled for the big field. An ancient man who had been young here arrived to say, Mother saw to the flowers, of course. Of course, Father saw to that. Their ancient son spoke of hives. Hives here, hives, honeybees, pears in the orchard, muck in the soil, all you had to have. The same water plashing, as they put it then, and gulped by the horses. Their shoes turn up in the beds. I see my luckless father ploughing, confident in his right, his eye on the holly marker, his tongue conversing with beasts. Social bees will not pause while there is light, while an anther can be seen to yield, and the poplars applaud them with grey and silver leaves. The roses blacken the cornfield fades.
I wonder what the happiest moment of your life has been.
I don't think I have one. I think I am always happy in some strange, not depressive. I have got friends who sometimes never really happy, but I feel a little bit happy is the word, but I tend to have a kind of serenity.
And living alone in solitude seems to be very important.
Yes, I can choose it just happens. People are amazed by it. Get by much stressful. Yeah, it's different categories. People think somebody's coming with a hatchet. But it is simply a great happiness waking up in the morning. We haven't got it done. But the name is in July, I see that but it is a kind of total wake up. We have it the day before.
Any regrets?
I sometimes regret that I didn't write novels. I read children's books, and it was very short stories. Something I think I should have done.
I think one of your most profound books is The View in Winter. How compassionate and wise it is, and how brave it is, facing loss and death and old age.
I read this book 30 years ago, and I had a sensation in America, Americans are very age conscious, and in the 92nd why, this is the equivalent of YMCA, Jewish people in New York. It's the biggest lecture room in New York. It's where Dylan Thomas first put on the board. And so, because of this book being this unspeakable something of old age, this enormous audience came. And at the Christian time, old lady, dressed in jewels and furs, stood out and told me about the condominium. And I didn't know what this meant. These are little towns where you go when you're old and they're nasty young people. And when you die, you're quite a little house, so you have 40 stars. Well, I really liked her, but I said I thought it was the best thing in the world. We should always be with people of all ages. In fact, what we should get is it's not a bad thing used to be this kind of cult of a certain age group. And when I was young, I'm sure many people can the same, it was a great treat to be at a meal with some of those old people who told you wonderful things and looked something very beautiful. And so when I got home, this woman was so offended by me saying about this. She said, "Your woman had to commit suicide." But I think when I was with John Nash and Sidney Morris and people of another generation, I knew all about it. I knew that people could let the things they got. So we only knew it, I think, when we talk naturally, not others. So I read this book on old age, which I found started in 1888.
Has he still got that book? I asked Diane to read a piece from A View in Winter, and she said it made her really happy.
It's the recognition, I think. You read something, oh, not just me. This is heading the class of 09, so that must have been in the time frame. The schoolmaster, aged 84, a need to talk about it.
Could the microphone be adjusted?
Sorry? Oh, sorry, right, thank you.
That's right. Yeah.
Old age doesn't necessarily mean that one is entirely old, all old, if you follow me. It doesn't mean that for many people, which is why it is so very difficult. It is complicated by the retention of a lot of one's youth in an old body. I tend to look upon other old men as old men and not include myself. It is not vanity, it is just that it is still natural for me to be young in some respects. What is generally assumed to have happened to a man in his 80s has not happened to me. The generalisations which go with my age don't apply. Yet I resent it all in some ways. This being very old, yes, I resent it. I have lost most of my physical strength, and once I was strong and loved doing physical work. I am not used to the loss of strength, and I object when many tasks show that they are now beyond me. I cannot quite believe that I can't carry this, or turn, or hold the other. This old part of me worries the young part of me. It could be that it would be better to be all old. I think that Delamere's got the confusion in a nutshell. His poem, A Portrait, says it all. I read it often now and find that the cap fits. Here it is. Old, yet unchanged, still pottering in his thoughts, still eagerly enslaved by books and print, less plagued perhaps by rigid musts and oughts, but no less frantic in vain argument. Punctual at meals, a spendthrift, close as Scott, rebellious, tractable, childish, long gone grey, impatient, volatile, tongue wearying not, loose too, which yet, thank heaven, was taught to pray. Childish indeed, a waif on shingle shelf, fronting the rippled sands, the sun, the sea, and naught but his marooned precarious self for questing consciousness and will to be. Too frail a basket for so many eggs, loose woven, gosling, signet, laugh or weep? Or is the cup but richest in its dregs, the actual realist on the verge of sleep? The foolish, fond old man, his bedtime nigh, who still at western window stays to win a transient respite from the latening sky, and scarce can bear it when the sun goes in. King Lear said, when the mind's free, the body's delicate, and that is true. My mind is very free now, but it isn't wandering. It is definite and active in all directions. I feel so alive, but my muscles tell me otherwise. I resent it a little, and it's no good pretending I don't. There has been a great loss of confidence. I'm not certain about anything now. There are great losses and small gains. I don't think that you grow in wisdom when you're old, but I do think that in some respects you do grow in understanding. The very old are often as tolerant as the young. The young haven't yet adopted certain formal codes, and the old have seen through them or no longer need them. I used to think this and believe that, but don't now. I circumscribe my wants. Few are as important as they once were, and they tend to lie quiet unless disturbed. They disturb me when I go out of my way to stimulate them, only then.
Thank you, Diane. Right, we've got a lecture item here that's not on your programmes, and you'll see why. I'll call Richard back to read something of Ronnie's.
It's occurred to find myself that this festival day is sandwiched between Armistice Day yesterday and Remembrance Sunday tomorrow. In 2009, a wonderful book was published here, The Impact of War on Sudbury, a Suffolk market town. It's entitled No Glorious Dead. Ronald wrote the foreword. A strange and unanswerable sentiment attaches to war, any war. For us to question this sentiment, even after many years, is for some people questionable in itself. However, because we now understand what caused the two world wars, the first precipitating the second, we see their victims less as heroes and more as humanity, caught up in one of its inhuman moments. One of the cliches connected with the returning First World War soldier was that he never talked about it. The terrible things he had seen, the dreadful things he may have done. But I have sometimes thought that this silence was born of ignorance for a vast number of those who fought in the Great War, and from every involved nation, could have had little idea of why they were there and what was happening, for they were virtually media-free in a way which we can hardly comprehend. Both sides fought each other under a few religious and nationalistic texts and slogans. When the armistice came in 1918, the word actually means a pause, not an end to the conflict. The death toll was so huge and the collapse of the old civilization so shocking that in a sense, words failed. Both the victors and the defeated. In Britain, the liturgy of the Armistice Day service and that of the naming of the dead was created from many sources. Its literary basis is that of the Georgian poets, and its memorials were unique in having every one of the fallen named on stone. I began my book, The Age of Illusion, published in 1963, with an account of the burial of the unknown warrior in Westminster Abbey, and of how this then novel form of national shrine came about. Edwin Lutyens had already carved the cenotaph, and the vicar of Margate suggested that an anonymous body should be brought from the Western Front and buried in the Abbey. Other nations copied this too. The 2-minute silence originated in Cape Town. The words, "They shall grow not old, as we that are left grow old," come from a poem by Lawrence Binyon, a poet working at the British Museum. And thus was created the language and the symbolism of the official mourning of both world wars. It can offend us now. At the time, particularly between the wars, when there was scarcely a home in the country without a lost son or father, there would have been some sense of nobility in it. But the faces have vanished. Millions have been killed by their own leaders in Europe, Russia and the Far East. And to us, the dead are not glorious, but tragic. And the Sudbury fallen, had they been brought up in war, would have lived much as we have lived. My own reaction to the colossal tragedy of the First World War was terrible sadness mixed with anger against those who caused it, and those who believed that a mile of ground was worth 1,000 young lives. But it is an old story, and each of us living now must try to understand it as best we can. It will become more and more difficult. This excellent book will help. It does.
Ian Collins. Hello, Ian Collins. I helped put together this new book, Next to Nature, A Life in English Countryside, and it's a wonderful book. I hugely recommend it. Fantastic reviews in The Guardian, Daily Telegraph, The Sunday Times. On Ronnie's 100th birthday, it was almost in the Amazon Top 100, which is just sensational. And now we've got the best person to read a sample of it today, because David Holt has just recorded the audio book. So he's going to read us a sample now.
What an introduction. Thank you, Ian. Thank you very much. I'm going to make it about half the length I originally intended, Colin, because I know that we're running over time. So I've chosen readings from Next to Nature, which are seasonal. And as we're in autumn, I thought we'd start there. And in fact, I'm sure this will chime with a lot of you, especially having just had that beautiful introduction to the book about the Sudbury War, the people who died. This is They Shall Grow Not Old. Lovely but sad days. The leaves fall, the sun shines. In church we muster for the remembrance. It has become a kind of saint's day, filling the aisles with its devotees. We turn to its memorial, and I say its liturgy. Its words are by the librarian poet Lawrence Binyon, and were published in the Times long before the Western Front massacres had begun. They shall grow not old as we that are left grow old. As a boy, I used to think that these soldiers would have found this cold comfort, and would very much have liked to have enjoyed a long life, but their melancholy suits the Georgian language of the remembrance. We sing Isaac Watts's O God, Our Help in Ages Past. Charlotte Bronte has a girl sing it in Shirley, her voice sweet and silver clear. Our voices, though darkened by time, do justice to this masterpiece. And so the service goes on, inside and outside. I preach on poppies, botanical and symbolical, blood-coloured and bloody. It was the Jewish poet Isaac Rosenberg in Break of Day in the Trenches who released, as it were, our emblematic poppy, the one we buttonhole. A rat touches his hand as I pull the parapet's poppy to stick behind my ear. Flanders was traditional farmland. Corn and its wild flowers had grown alongside there for centuries. Just as its birds sang above the din, so did its poppies bleed in its mud. The imagery seems to grow more intensely every remembrance, and my sermons ever more botanical. But our greatest time hymn, O God, Our Help in Ages Past, says more and more to me about mortality and immortality, or so I find. It is grand, sonorous, truthful, accepting, tragic yet comforting, and it first appeared in Wesley's Psalms and Hymns in 1738. A poignant verse was left out long ago, but it uncannily suggests the Western Front. Like flowery fields the nations stand, pleased with the morning light. The flowers beneath the mower's hand lie withering ere 'tis night. Too far to walk. We drive from our church to a steel memorial by the side of the road. It is to the American airmen who came to Wormingford on St. Andrew's Day in 1943. Some 200 of them were killed. Too many names to read out and halt the Sunday traffic racing by. Their colonel, almost 100, sends a message from the United States. My father, a teenager at Gallipoli, refused to attend these rites. The band playing, the mayor in his robes, the snowy war memorial in the little Suffolk town. Once central, it has long been put to the side of the road so as not to delay a flood of cars. Otherwise you would have taken your life in your hands. I say Binion's words all over again. They float in the mild air. I remember my friend John Nash, who painted both the trenches and the Second World War docks, and Christine, his wife, who ran a canteen at Portsmouth for the sailors. John told me that 1939 never meant as much to him as 1914. His brother Paul painted the Battle of Britain, the Heinkels and Spitfires like stars in the Kent sky, and so it continues, the reality and the dream. Between services, I rake up fallen leaves, mostly from the giant oaks which stare out of the valley into the next parish. They are all in line, their roots in the everlasting stream, their tops spying little Hawksley. I'll move on to spring. This piece is called My Little Owls. And I think it's a beautiful summary of Rodney's wonderful outlook on life. Certain happiness, pear blossom, 6 a.m. tea, matins for a dozen in the chancel, making my sweet pea wigwam, seeing strangers pass, listening to the director of the British Museum on the radio, watching the manes of the horses on the hill being caught in the wind, reading Psalm 96. Eating a miser's meal, pot de jour, a curling crust, cheese ends, and a wizened apple. Loving my little cat. Not going to the party. Sploshing up the farm track, remembering the Garretts in Cambridge, listening to George Herbert on the radio, seeing the boundary ditch full of water, a whisky at bedtime. Silence. Oaks before ash promising a splash. Rereading Swan's Way. Finding the nail scissors. Visiting the new bookshop in Stoke-by-Nayland. Watching the world greening. Remembering the Turners in Cornwall. Finishing a chapter. Choosing a page of Kilvert's diary for a sermon. Hearing a climbing rose scratch against the window like Catherine Earnshaw's Escape Me Never hands. Eating olives. The lawnmower starting at first pull. Feeding chaffinches. Watching Dan draw. The unbelievable scent of bluebells. The kindness of strangers at the hospital. Ash log fires. New jerseys. Giving Vicky plants. Hearing bumblebees. Knowing that the summer spreads before me. Finding true sadness at the passing of Gerald, the village shop dog. Finding stitchwort and wild garlic in their accustomed spots, touching the sun-warmed Roman bricks of the Saxon Tower in Colchester, and imagining the hands that formed them. Seeing beautiful girls lean on the 1,000-year-old doorway, myself seeing for the 1,000th time the house of John Wilby, the madrigalist, whose patron gave him a sheep farm for his services. Listening hard, what bliss to hear him singing among the shoppers. Catching sight of my little owls in the blackthorn, where they have always been. The satisfaction when flowers and creatures know their places. Choosing hymns for Sunday, carefully of course, as our 3 churches have 3 different books, 3 parish magazines as well, 3 of everything, 1 of the vicar, 1 of myself. I consider our oneness. The April happiness of finding so much promising, to have it all before one, though not to count the days, but let them bud and open. The weather to try everything on from gale to serenity, the pages of the current book to fall into chapters, the man from the British Museum to show Shakespeare and a handful of artefacts, and George Herbert to show us the church as only he can. Summer. grass. The great meadow is being mowed. Keith and Bernard clatter up and down its plunging acres on a machine which throws out burnt brown rectangular hay biscuits. A voice says, "Cry! What shall I cry? All flesh is grass." A tolerable image of transience. The washing bleaches on the lawn. The gooseberries are being gathered with the blackbirds looking on. Thousands of old roses perfume the slight wind. Dark William Lobb, delicate Celestine, rich Charles de Mille, susceptible leader, modest John Clare, the latest to arrive in the garden. We have staggered home from yet one more flower festival at Mount Buers. Few in this high village have much notion of arrangement in today's semi-professional terms, and so we see something absolutely different and flawless of its kind. Vicky read from the Song of Songs, and John from the Lord's attack on materialism in Luke chapter 12, whilst Diana preached on a horticultural philosophy of life. Outside, the mount, shaggy with brambles, cast long shadows over the graves of the congregation before the present one. If its flesh is indeed grass, then it is the best silky, tidy grass. We listen to the click, clack and whistle of the Sudbury train as it reaches our crossing, but nobody glances at his watch. Nobody says, as they once did, "What did you make it? I make it half a minute late." I have finished a book, a novel, and I do not feel as I am supposed to feel, that I have made and lost or done with a child. Rather, I feel as some people do, when the guests have gone, released. I think of all the things I shall do with no book to cry, "Write me as soon as I get up." I might read all the books which have been waiting for me to read this last year, although I am not likely to be as deplorable as the late Jean Rhys, and sit on the floor drinking gin at breakfast and browsing in old tales, smoking like a trooper and not giving a damn. But I might lie under the poplars to hear their summary clapping, one of the loveliest sounds in the world, and an immortal one, I am sure. And I shall certainly consider the grasses as well as the lilies. If flesh is to transmigrate, where better than to the rich greening of the world? The final piece is a poem, but I know that Ian would like to introduce it first.
The book has an introduction by Richard Maybe, and he's going to be on front row, I think, on Wednesday, talking about the book. And then we had 12 writers introducing each monthly section. And Nick, the publisher, and I enlisted, well, we wrote to Vikram Seth in India. He doesn't reply to his emails. He's deep in the sequel to A Suitable Boy, A Suitable Girl. And anyway, he finally replied when we got our full list together. So we've made his contribution, which is a poem. It's an acrostic poem spelling out Ronnie's name with the first letters of its lines. And we've made it the afterword. And David's going to read it now.
Simply called For Ronald Blythe. Right hand and left make 10. Earth rings the sun. On these two truths we mark your 100th year. Nature performs its heartless, witless run. Art presses us to see and smell and hear. Lucid and strange, your words transmit the sound, discordant and concordant, of Earth's round. By fallow and by field, by rust and rose, little or large, by whimsy or by worth, your transitory histories disclose two truths encrypted in the transient earth. Hearts that can sing educe the blackbird's song. Elms that stand far enough away live long.
Thank you. We couldn't hear more. But where are we? It's coming at 6 o'clock now. We're going to start showing Ekenfield. I'm hoping that there's a buffet up there for those who have paid for the buffet. And I hope you're going to play for that before you rush off. And thank you everyone for coming. Thank you all the readers, and I hope you enjoyed it.
Thank you.